At the time I write this secret document, I'm still functioning in the Norwegian police system as a senior detective. If you read this, it means my worst fears has come true and the Dagenbolt manor case has again been opened. I hope you will at least read these few pages before you go into the other documents you surely must have seen by now. Something to file away with the rest of the documents in this strange case as a warning of what I went through at that horrible place. Something I hope after you have read this you will file away and never disturb again. As I previously wrote, I am at present time still a senior detective in the Norwegian police system. I fear though it will not be so for very much longer. I have been advised by the psychologist who is treating me to take an extended sick leave from my station due to the state of my nerves and the state of my mind as a whole. To be completely honest, within these pages, I'm not really sure if I want to come back to the police force after everything that has happened and of what seems to be going on within the walls of this department these days. A fair layer of secrecy and paranoia has fallen upon this place since the strange case I'm going to write about came to an untimely conclusion. A conclusion that wasn't very satisfying to anyone, and to the police department least of all. Something which has given roots to prying eyes and long ears around here, and I feel the environment is gradually getting more toxic for each day that goes by, and I'm slowly suffocating within it. I think it's wise to get some distance from this place and that particular case, which has haunted me far longer than it should have been allowed to. To my defense, in all of this I will simply state that I tried to make sense of it all. In the later stages of all that time that seems to have passed way quicker than it ought to have, I've been doing not much else than to think and process this case, which is really not very healthy. A case without any real public closure, or any final rest of peace for the many families and loved ones that is left behind. It all lies buried below the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor, I'm afraid. That very area which I will never go back to. The place where so much evil has happened over the course of time, and Mother Earth herself tried her very best to wipe it out of human memory. No, I shall never go back to that place, but I must, while there is still time, leave something behind as a warning to others should this case ever be reopened. Not that there seems to be any eagerness to do so now, but if I know time and humans correctly, there is not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. My official name is Isaac Johansen, but everyone around here called me AJ. Not that it has any importance for the story I'm about to write down, I guess, other than the credibility of this document. You can see for yourself where my name is attached to a lot of these documents within the file box you must have undoubtedly opened if you are now reading this. It should serve as proof at least of the fact that I was one of the leading detectives in this case. Me and my partner Marcus got called out on a case early morning, late in September at a remote place an hour drive from town. None of us had ever heard of the place before, but there seemed to be a lot of activity at the location, as some Norwegian and foreign archaeologists had found human ruins of a large manor at the site. The reason for our involvement was because of a truck driver who were delivering all types of supplies close to their camp. He hadn't seen or heard from the group in about a week. Before this, the driver's routine was to deliver things to the place he had been told were called the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor every other day, and he had always been greeted with friendly faces eagerly awaiting his arrival. Since no one had met him when delivering supplies the last couple of times he was up there, the driver thought it a bit strange but left the goods at their empty camp area, seeing as it was Friday and he had the weekend to look forward to. Then as the days went by, he came back for another drop-off on Monday. Not seeing anyone and noticing his untouched deliveries piling up from before the weekend, he knew something was wrong. At the time when Marcus and I arrived, it was still early morning. I remember it was late in the year and the sun had still not gone over the horizon yet. The usual chill had begun to grip the forest-laden steep, rolling hilly countryside. It was only because of the truck driver's detailed description of how to get there that we even found the place. Part of me to this day wish we never had, and an even more cynical part of me wish Marcus and I never ever were on duty that morning. The truck's high beam headlights greeted us with a couple of reassuring flashes as Marcus steered the police car onto the last stretch of the beaten muddy grass road to Dagenbolt Manor. Once there, the truck driver, a balding stubby man in his late 40s, came towards us after he had climbed out of the truck. Flashlights in hands, we followed the man to the archaeologist's camp where he retold his story of involvement. He also told us he had been walking around the area on 2 occasions without finding any signs of those whom he was now certain were missing. Marcus and I began to speculate even before we had set foot in the camp that such a large group of people couldn't just go missing all at once. This was a case of bad communication, or lack thereof, to inform the driver to stop transporting goods to their camp. Judging it to be such a late time in the year, we were almost positive the group had packed up and left for the season. This theory we were going to find correct once we had found who these people were and to which university or institute they belonged. It was with this presumption and attitude we approached the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor, an apprehension that I'm certain we could have handled better if I'm so inclined to judge our way of how we approached this case. The encampment was a large area set up with weather-beaten grey tents. In the middle, a large campfire and seating areas had been made both from what was found in the forest and some that had been brought for better comfort. The wind seemed to have been free to do whatever it liked for some time, and thrown about papers and loose bits of plastic trash wherever it pleased. At the entrance of the camp lay the big pile of supplies the truck driver eagerly showed us as a proof of his testimony. Following his lead, we began to carefully shine our flashlights into the large tents that stood around us. Makeshift desks and sleeping quarters dominated these thin housings that never were meant to be permanent and at least of all a shelter for the approaching winter. At such a shallow glance, nothing looked out of the ordinary, and Marcus and my theory could have held. But then, as I inspected the tents more closely, I found personal items beside the beds and in the residents' footlockers. In fact, we found numerous items, now well documented in the case files, that no one in their right mind would have left behind. At this point, the case began to raise sinister suspicions in us. Returning to the center of the camp, I began to inspect the papers that lay strewn about. Of what I could gather, there seemed to be notes of archaeological nature. One page, even through its dirty and moisty appearance, seemed to show drawings of what must have been a large complex, or, as we later came to understand, was of a mansion and its surrounding land as it might have looked many hundreds of years ago. As the sun rose over the hills and began to drive the morning mist away, Marcus and I began to inspect the archaeological dig. About 100 feet away from the encampment, a large area had been cleared of trees and underbrush. Huge amount of dirt and rocks had been removed from portions of it. Inside the newly cleared area, cotton strings had been stretched all around it and dividing it into many places in almost equal squares. Here and there we could see thick ruined walls, which seemed to have been above earth level before the dig had begun. Now, as the vegetation had been removed, it seemed entirely possible that such a large complex had stood here at this area. Marcus and I couldn't help ourselves but to pause for a moment in wonder and awe at what had been uncovered here. I could easily see it before me, as the sketch I had found earlier was still fresh in my mind about how it must have looked a long time ago. Such thoughts though troubled me, for as I wrote earlier, I had never heard of this place even though I was born and raised not more than a couple of hours of travel away from there. Norway's history isn't really rich in nobility or has many large mansions or estates to boast about. If this area was indeed such a place, I was shocked to think how it had been swallowed up and forgotten. How could it though? Surely, the neighboring towns and their people must have had some connection to it, and therein lay my problem. Why had no one ever bothered to write down, tell their children about such a place, and why had they let it become swallowed up by Mother Earth herself? I was deeply unsettled and troubled by these thoughts, I must admit. Marcus, on the other hand, had his head turned more to the case, it seemed, and so with a polite nudge, he signaled me to move one way while he searched in another. I obliged while continuously looking around, searching for any hints or clues that could tell us more about what had happened to archaeologists. The amount of work these people had done throughout the season was truly staggering. Much of the area still lay undisturbed, but the other parts had been fully excavated down to a stone-lined cellar floor where it seemed the archaeologists had stopped and continued elsewhere. I was truly fascinated by this profession, as I could almost see them in front of me, hard at work and sometimes doing discoveries they gladly shared with the other colleagues. But in thinking so, I also came to more questions that bothered me immensely. Had the archaeologists found something here? Something of such an importance that they all had left at once? As I moved carefully around the dig's edges, which seemed to stretch on forever, I saw weak outlines in the dirt that led away from it. Following the weak path with my eyes in the brightening morning air, I thought I could see another set of square cotton springs, marking yet another dig and some sort of a tumbled tent. I was just about to head that way when Marcus signaled me to come towards him. Finding a safe path to the dig was no easy task. Marcus had somehow managed to climb into the center of the ruins and seemed excited to show me something. I reached my colleague, wondering what he had found. Following his example, I shone my flashlight down into a dark, downwards going stone-laid stairway that disappeared into the darkness and out of sight. Here the archaeologists seemed to have focused a lot of time and energy to clear a path through the rubble and dirt which had collapsed down into the nether regions. Not wanting to leave the area before it was thoroughly searched, Marcus and I decided to start the descent into the unknown. I have smelled many unpleasant and even foul stenches before. Being a policeman sometimes brings you close to the stench of death and its many stages of decay. This, however, was something entirely new to us, as a weird mix of something sweet mixed in with the centuries of humid stale air insulted our noses. We both gagged when entering the hall, but we pressed on, determined to take a quick look at the nether structures of what once was called Dagenbolt Manor. The stairs led us quickly downwards into what felt like the center of the earth itself. It was a fairly spacious slanting chamber without any real finesse on the walls or the ceiling, as it seemed to have been dug right out of the hillside itself. As we reached the bottom, we stepped onto the rocky flat floor-like surface in what seemed like a corridor leading into a naturally made grotto. The cavern stretched out in front of us as well as beside us, longer than the flashlights could cast the lights. We stood for a moment listening for any kind of sounds that could come from the archaeologists while also looking around in astonishment. I'm not sure about my colleague, but seeing such a vast cavern stretching out before us made an uneasy feeling surge through me. I couldn't help myself from wondering if the archaeologists had been meaning to find this place all along, or if they just happened to uncover such a secret as the dug-out Dagenbolt Manor. The steps seemed deliberately made, even pre-planned, and so my thoughts went out to those that built them and the enormous mansion over it. What type of people needed a place like this, and what had it been used for? I'm sure the archaeologists must have asked themselves the same type of questions when they found it, if they didn't already know. That would suggest they were after something specific though. Something that had lain hidden for hundreds of years, buried beneath all that rubble and dirt. Something I now know were hidden for a reason, and should have been left so, in peace and undisturbed. My partner and I began to move through the cavern. Slowly at first, not sure of our footings or the new environment we were suddenly in. Stalagmites and stalactites were numerous and still moist as they kept making eerie dripping sounds while we proceeded forward. The smell upon entering the underground area was pungent, but not stronger than before, and so we felt we could press on. Here and there, rubbles of rotting wood and man-formed rocks lay scattered around, giving the impression that someone had spent a lot of time down here a long time ago. Then, as we moved continuously forward in what we believed was towards the center of the cave, it widened out above us even further. Before us lay a large pool-like area with richly decorated stone pillars to support the ceiling. Around the pool stood electrical working lights and a large power generator, among other things. The archaeologists had certainly made this place a high target, and who could have blamed them? All types of modern electronic equipment and manual tools lay around the area where camping equipment and tables had been set up. All this, however, became secondary important as our attention was forced upon the center of the murky pool, which were dominated by a massive naturally made looking pillar with strange symbols and carvings on it that made us both freeze in our search for a long moment and glare in pure amazement. It was Marcus who found the first dead body. I wanted to try to get the generator going, as I felt a terror for the unknown which was beginning to creep up on me in the darkness. The generator had run out of gas, but a large supply of gasoline stood nearby. As the generator came on, I drew a breath of relief, seeing how the work lights began to spread the welcoming rays of illumination. Not long after, Marcus called me over, as he was trying to fish a dead body from the pool. With our combined strength, we managed to get the dead man onto the rocky surface. We shrank back from the sight and smell from the body's condition. He had been dead in the water for a while. Much later, he was identified as one of the archaeologists by his parents. As it were, we only assumed he was one of the missing, and our suspicions as well as our questions just kept on rising. We now feared the worst, without the means to understand how or why. That is why we only did a quick walk further down the cave system, calling out for anyone. The mystery of what had happened to the archaeologists had deepened, and we both knew we were in our heads. So, without getting any feedback from anyone, when we called out, we hurried back to the surface where we called in for backup. Many days and hundreds of police hours later, a police officer found another archaeologist down in the cavern, unconscious and barely alive, well hidden away behind an elevated rock cropping inside one of the cavern's many walls. This female, we learned later, was Sarah Goodwin from a positive ID badge. She woke up 3 days later in a state of frenzy and fright so great she had to be sedated several times due to the adrenaline running through her veins. Then, after spending numerous hours with the doctors and psychologists, she was transported to an institute for seriously traumatized individuals. No police interview could get any sense out of what she was saying, and soon after she was found mysteriously dead one morning within her own confinement space. Another archaeologist was found deep within the forest much in the same condition as Sarah by a couple of hikers. This individual, by the name of Thomas Axelsen, lives to this day, as far as I know, within the same institute Sarah was brought to. His condition seems to be stable today, yet unwavering from a mental breakdown, and back then brought us no closer to the fate of the other 15 archaeologists that were missing. At the time I'm writing of, not long after the discovery of Thomas in the woods, the Dagenbolt manor case was a hot topic. Marcus and I were still leading the investigation, with a lot of manpower behind us. The cave system beneath Dagenbolt manor with its surroundings were thoroughly searched and mapped. The archaeologist camp was painstakingly searched, and every note, scribbled page and trash paper were gathered and pieced together. Every and any angle were looked at to try to understand better what the archaeologists were after and why 15 of them were still missing. After we had contacted a lot of institutes, we finally tracked down their base of origination in Trondheim. A certain Professor John A. Brandon from the United States, who hailed from the city of Seawood, had led the archaeological dig after gathering a lot of funding and getting the right kind of permits. He had brought with him some of his colleagues and friends from overseas, but most of his team was newly educated archaeologists from Norway. The personal belongings and notes we found at the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor seemed to authenticate these persons as those who were now missing. As I previously wrote, we gathered hundreds of loose papers and other things that we regarded as clues. After the search of the missing people had gone cold and we had chased down any physical, logical whereabouts they could be, we began to look at the data we had gathered. I was particularly interested in Professor Brandon's notes, and so having read them many times, I'm confident I can give the cliff notes here from memory, but you can check them out yourself, as I am sure they are within the same case box as you have found this document you are now reading. Mr. Brandon, the professor in archaeology, had long been on the search for a mysterious middle-class man named Erich von Dagenbolt. Professor Brandon had come across the name only a couple of times in late medieval text, even though it seemed he mingled for a time in the circles of higher society. His title was a mystery by its own right, as it seemed the powers that be during those days had done everything they could to scrub any records of the man and of his associations. Strange as this might be, it became even more mysterious when a new text was found by the professor which mentioned the Dagenbolt manor as the estate of Erich von Dagenbolt. For many years this became like an obsession for the professor. It was as if the high society shunned the name in its entirety, and a conspiracy had been formed to rid the history of his home and existence. The professor speculated upon why, naturally, and even went as far as to compare him to some early Rasputin type, the Russian who self-proclaimed he was a holy man and mystic. Perhaps Erich had been a dabbler in the occult and had won the favor of the ruling powers at that time. Maybe had found his way into the high society that way? It certainly wasn't impossible if he had performed some type of miracle, like healing someone, or if he had done some other type of magnificent feat which other wise men couldn't deal with at the time. As the years went by, Professor Brandon gathered small clues about the Dagenbolt family and about the man himself. He found traces such a lineage immigrating from Belgium some centuries earlier, but he suspected they originated even further from the east. About the Dagenbolt manor there seemed to be little information. However, the professor suspected that Erich had not bought such a place since the family's history seemed to be simply farmers or country folk who lived of the land or the sea. Something had changed, however, when the family immigrated to Belgium, and at some point they rose in status and wealth. The solution, the professor suspected, lay in winning favors among influential and powerful families at the time. Then, as a token of gratitude, Erich was awarded the Dagenbolt manor, which they named after him in an act of honor. The professor speculated that was when he got the title of von as well. This seems plausible, and the professor searched tirelessly in his free time around this enigma. The solution came, it seemed, as more of a coincidence than anything else. While attending a seminar in Frankfurt, Germany, he was approached by another archaeologist who had heard about the professor's many inquiries over the years. The archaeologist's name was Franz Wildenhof, a man who would later be co-founding the archaeological dig at Dagenbolt Manor. Through some research on his own, Franz had tracked down the living relatives of the Dagenbolt family in Belgium. This in turn led to a long-lasting friendship between those two archaeologists, and perhaps more importantly, a visit to these relatives of Erich von Dagenbolt. Hidden away on some dusty attic, the family had old family heirlooms like furniture and also some chests filled with personal belongings and old letters from the other family members. The archaeologists were lucky there and found a few letters from Erich, and on them an address that soon led them to the discovery of the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor in Norway, of all places. The letters too were of enormous importance and immense historical value, not only to the professors but to the Norwegian history as well. It not only solidified the man stricken nearly entirely from every record in history, but it also gave them an insight of the mysterious man himself and perhaps a chance to rewrite a little bit of history along the way. The professor wouldn't go into details about the content of the letters themselves, although upon reading them he wrote he was puzzled about the man's nature and even more curious to his secrecy when it came to his dealings in his home country. The answers to the secrecy the professor was convinced lay in the ruins of Dagenbolt Manor. Now the only thing he had to do was to find a way to finance a dig there. A dig which would bring forth the true history of Erich von Dagenbolt and his mysterious manor. The very manor which had been hidden away by Mother Earth herself for so many years. A manor that would once again rise up from its depth of historical obscurity and cause headlines across the world. I would have found some appreciation of the irony in his dreams if he didn't have such a grim ending. I'm sure though it wasn't what he had envisioned when he finally did make the news. It took the professor still some years to fund the excavation, and while doing so he was met with a lot of strange setbacks both from the system he was working in and from outside sources which seemed to want to let the estate remain hidden. When it was time to set up the camp and stripping the dig area clean, it was noted as a difficult and slow-going process plagued with many almost serious injuries and strange accidents. It was, as he wrote in his own words, as if history and Mother Nature herself had done everything they could to wipe out any trace of the man called Erich and his Dagenbolt Manor. A task which they still kept on doing and fought the professor and his team every step of the way as they tried to unravel the truth. One of the professor's colleagues had even noticed signs of a landslide which must have buried the ruins even deeper at one point, as if the earth itself had tried to do its part. Later, as the dig began, they found traces of a large fire which could have brought the whole place down, leaving valuable clues to how Erich von Dagenbolt may have ended his days. As the months went by, the professor kept writing down every discovery made and about each object they found, even though there were other documents for exactly such a purpose. The reason for this was, as I have interpreted between the professor's own lines, was to try to get a more accurate feeling for the owner of the mansion and try to see through his eyes when the complex was still intact and operational. It was speculated that Erich had a large influence over the nearby villages and the community around it at the time it was fully operational. It was as if Dagenbolt Manor was built for the purpose of looking down upon the working class far down below from the hills high above. The professor, perhaps shockingly to those who might read this or his notes on their own, found it intriguing and even went as far as to sympathize for such a role and wondered how it would have felt to live at the mansion as its master at that time. He felt, he wrote, a kinship towards the place, and in some ways he felt he had, after so many years of research and searching for it, finally found his way back home. As he kept on writing his notes for what must have been weeks, I noticed a slight change in the way he wrote about his colleagues. He seemed to me more agitated and criticized the rest of the crew for the smallest of errors or wrongdoings. To me, it felt like he was searching for something specific or waiting for something great to be discovered. It could have been just normal pressure about the dig and how it would be seen by others, I suppose. A significant find of high value, either money-wise or for historical gain, would certainly have lessened the professor's pressure he felt he was under. This though don't make much sense, seeing as such a manor found on Norwegian ground is highly significant in its own right. In the middle of August, the professor and his team found the stairs beneath the cellar floor. Professor Brandon wrote about it in great detail with both amazement and confusion. In his own words he wrote he felt he was close to something truly magnificent. Something which Erich had kept a secret and which now could lead to a great revelation of the enigma surrounding the name of Erich and Dagenbolt Manor. Knowing my own feelings and how strange it felt to walk down those steps, I feel and know to some extent how excited the professor must have been when the rubble was cleared and the team ventured down into the cave with flashlights at hand. Of the journey down below, he simply wrote it was the most amazing day of his life.